In school, they teach us that they burned books in Germany, yet they never tell us what books they burned. The books they burned included transgender ideas, sex changes on little children who were unwilling. The main Jewish professor who organized these such events was Jewish, and he had his own little kid that he had as a sex slave. Weimar conditions! Weimar solution! Right now.
Oh, there we go.
There you
go, boy.
Right now. Yeah. Yeah.
Fascism shuts you mother
Fascism over Fascism over. Do you think umbrellas cover up your degeneracy?
That piece of garbage Nazi there with the tween age voice, as his voice finally begins to change. His name is Ayman Penny. He's a terrorist, as a matter of fact, and he's pushing all these Nazi talking points. That was a list last month that an Ohio drag reading hour that, of course, a bunch of white supremacists showed up to throw Nazi salutes around and curse folks out at, because that's what their life entails. Here's a couple of images of this pictures of what he then did afterward when he firebombed a church. He firebombed a church because they were going to put forward a drag reading hour as well. So his life should pretty much be over. Here's some images from that, some of the charred images that happened inside that church from his attempts at firebombing it. Which on that little poster there, it also points out how it's a community preschool. So as they're looking to protect children, they decide to firebomb the places that children go, because that makes sense. So here's some more details of what it is he was about and what it is he was trying to do there. Ohio resident Ayman Penny, he's only 20 years old, faces up to 30 years of prison if convicted on these 2 charges of malicious use of explosive materials and possession of a destructive device from March 25th on this attack. The FBI reported finding a Nazi flag, a White Lives Matter of Ohio t-shirt, and other hateful memorabilia in his house, along with a gas mask, multiple rolls of blue painter's tape, and gas cans, all to put things together for this firebombing that he did. Now, that wasn't the only thing it's about. Police probably had this guy on their radar, which is going to go to my final point. Months earlier, on October 11th of last year, the Alliance Police Department saw him distributing hateful flyers too. This is what he was saying to them and what was going on. Penny told the police that the flyers were in an effort to spread the word. In his opinion, African Americans were the problem. Further, he wanted to educate everyone about their violence toward white Americans. Penny stated that he believed African Americans were solely responsible for the high crime rate across the country. Sounds like Fox News. Penny further made it clear that he believes and looks forward to the civil war coming between the races. They heard him say this. He also expressed his belief that the United States will not prosper until all the other races, or weaknesses, as he called them, are gone. These are things where he's espousing all this hate, violence, civil war, wants to eradicate certain particular people in the country, firebombs a church for planning a drag reading hour, goes to a drag reading hour in Ohio and starts threatening folks. Of course, they all have guns on their hips, and they're taunting and challenging folks, because that's what they do with their lives. So, it's pretty obvious to me, maybe you guys can disagree with me on this, that Penny is a proud terrorist. He's a terrorist. He's in a terrorist organization. These white supremacist groups that go around firebombing places so people are afraid to go into them sounds like terrorist activities. And if he was a Muslim terrorist, go around bombing people and saying, I'm going to kill certain people in the country, you think they wouldn't call that terrorism? I'll have to ask that question, because if you look at this NBC News headline that I just saw from today, is a U.S. citizen. He's been sentenced to 20 years in prison for joining an Islamic State group. He's 55 years old. He's a U.S. citizen. He was born in Trinidad and Tobago, and he's sentenced Tuesday for joining this ISIS group overseas, and he's providing material support. He was getting trained up on how to shoot. He was doing all these different things. What I'm trying to figure out, Jessica, and this is just the back end of it, so there's so much more you can respond to. But one thing, maybe I'm wrong here. There's a guy who joined a terror group overseas, and he's been sentenced to 20 years for joining it. How come we're not sentencing these terrorists for joining terror cells, where they're obviously pointing out to authorities, we are a terrorist group. We bomb churches. We look to kill certain people. And I've joined this group. This is my life. This is what I do. I'm a violent person. Why aren't they being arrested for joining terror groups?
That's a good question, Jayar. I would say it's because they're more aligned with the police than I think the police would like us to know. I think that's why it's so shocking when we have folks like that one sheriff who happens to be an anti-fascist getting death threats. It's because people expect the police to be on their side when they're espousing, right-wing extremist rhetoric, and that's exactly what's happening here. When they say that African Americans are committing acts of violence against white Americans, I can't help but cringe. Because you have to know this country's history. You have to know we're 3 generations away from literal chattel slavery. That accusation is absolutely insane when you consider, especially what the police do on a day-to-day basis in the United States of America, just disgusting. And then you have him say that who burned books during the Holocaust was actually Jewish professors burning books, and that the Jewish professor also happened to have a child slave. Here's an idea. If your problem is with pedophilia, why don't you protest the child marriage laws that we have in the United States that allow people to marry children as early as the age of 14, 16? Maybe that would be a better use of your time and energy than showing up to drag brunches, drag story hour. It doesn't make sense. If you don't like violence, maybe be a pacifist, maybe advocate for peace. It's because that's not what any of this is about. We know very well that Jewish people did not burn books during the Holocaust. The Nazis were burning the books, and they were burning books by Jewish authors. They were burning books about communism and about socialism and about ideas that were antithetical to living in a fascist police state. They burned books by Karl Marx. They burned books about liberalism and about anarchism. They burned books that were a threat to their power in Germany. And now the books that we are banning in the United States are very similar to those books. They're not banning books about transgenderism that are in public school libraries. They're talking about banning very basic curriculum, but it's these ideas like in Animal Farm that make you think critically about what's going on politically that they want banned. It couldn't be more obvious, and they're totally fine with just completely lying and having that be the basis of their argument and platform.
It's almost like they should have gone to some history classes that apparently aren't going to be taught much more in the country, especially if they find themselves down in Ron DeSantis's area of the country. So terrorists everywhere, but they have white skin, so they're not really terrorists. Again, look up the stats. Department of Homeland Security pointed out the #1 terror in our country is from white, homegrown, white supremacist Nazi terrorism. It happens all the time. #1. You don't have to believe it. I guess you don't really want to.